In previous session, we discussed how to resolve this sales bar chart question. Now, one thing to note, we already said there are 10 rows in the file, so we define the sales bar chart array as 10. What if we do not know how many rows are in the file? This is actually more common. So what you can do usually is, I believe we discussed the partially filled array. In a partially filled array, you define a large array to the extent that normally this size will never be filled completely. You won't reach that amount of elements, but you will use a counter to count how many elements is currently inside that array. Then every time you add one, you increase the counter. So in this case, if we are saying that Joe's Pizza will have their sales bar chart generated at least once per year, then we can pretty much put this as 365 or maybe 366. 366. So it will not be met at all. While we have the counter running, every time there's a new row, we will create a new we will create a new sales bar chart element and the counter will plus plus. So the counter inside this loop will always pointing to the most current object, the most current element. Outside this loop, counter, because we have this counter plus plus, the counter will always be the number of the elements inside this array. So once we start at 0, at the very beginning, there was no element. As soon as you read in the first Monday, you will operate on bar chart 0, which is the first element. As we finish these operations, we then have a counter plus plus, which is counter now equals to 1. Then counter is pointing to the number of elements inside this array because we just finished Monday. Then in the next loop, we have Tuesday. And here, counter equals to 1 is pointing to bar chart 1, which is the second element, the most current one that you just generated. Then once you finish these operations, counter plus plus, make it 2. Counter will be 2. If we only have 2 rows and we exit, right now counter is pointing to the number of elements that will be used, that is existing. So the only change we need to do is to convert this bar chart length to counter, because bar chart length now is a fixed number. It's all the possible potential elements. But counter itself is the count, is the number of elements. So this is one thing we are going to change, and we are going to run this again with input.txt. What if I didn't change this bar chart length? Input.txt. Now you can see there's a exception. Why there's an exception? Because after you print out the Wednesday element, which means counter equals to 10, you are stuck in the for loop, and you are trying to print out the display bar chart of bar chart 10. But bar chart 10 is empty. Counter is empty. Counter is 10. Bar chart 10 is empty. There's no object created yet. So you will fail. This will fail. That's why you need to change this counter, and it will work. All right. And so this is the common practice when you handle a partially filled array, where you assign a large number and use a counter to count the number of existing elements. And because array index always start at 0, inside the loop, whether it's a for or a while. Usually it's while because you don't know how many elements are there. Inside of the while, you can use this counter as an index for the most current one, most current element. Then increment the counter element at the end of the loop. Once you get out, you do you will use counter as the number of existing elements inside the array, inside the partially filled array.